Good afternoon. Good afternoon to all of you that decided to join our discussion this afternoon, and good morning for the people that are participating on the other side of the ocean. My name is Maria Gianniti. I am a foreign correspondent for RAI in Jerusalem, based in Jerusalem. And this panel, you have seen the title, Israel-Palestine Forever on the Brink, is the second event of a whole year that will lead to the conference, to the Med Dialogue, that is the conference that is held in Rome, that is organized by ISPI and the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Why we are here to discuss what is happening between Israel and Palestine? Because we have seen what happened during recent days. During last week, there was a flare of violence, very troubling. But this is also happening in a very delicate time for Israel, with a new government, and a government led for the sixth time by Benjamin Netanyahu, that is facing a strong protest inside by the civil society for some moves that should be taken in the near future, specifically on justice reform. So we will try to fit all this in 45 minutes. It's not a lot of time, but our panelists will help us to give light to this very difficult situation. So let me introduce you NIMROD GOREN, that is the president of the Israeli Institute for Regional Foreign Policies. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. DALAL IRIQAT, she's assistant professor at the Arab American University in Palestine. Good afternoon. And good morning, in that case, to Aaron David Miller, senior fellow for the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining us. And so I was saying, a very difficult time in a moment in which there is also something strongly changing also inside Israel. So we have to try to understand how the two things combine together. And also, on this, Aaron Miller will help us to understand also the worries from Washington side due to the recent visit that we have seen from Secretary of State Antony Blinken. So, Nimrod, for the first time, Israel has a strong right-wing government that is taking steps, very strong steps, also regarding the Palestinian issues. So how all this, what is happening now, fits with this new government, and which are the difficulties that also the Palestinians have to face in order to have a sort of dialogue, or to restart a dialogue with the Israeli counterpart. Please.
Thank you, and pleasure being here. You know, we are at an unprecedented moment in Israeli politics, not because we have a right-wing government, because we have those for several decades already, but because we have a far-right government, as right as we could possibly have, with extremist actors within key governmental positions, individuals who are seen as illegitimate within our political system only a couple of years ago. And that government that is operating within a context of a parliament that almost does not have anymore ideological left-wing opposition, that almost did not cross the threshold these last elections, eventually gives rise to democratic erosion that is happening very quick and in a very serious manner inside Israel, and it leads almost the 50% that did not vote for the Netanyahu coalition to initiate a series of pushback efforts to resist those efforts, those reforms, those legislation carried out by the government. So over the last weeks, we see inside Israel a series of actions, demonstrations, protests of many sorts involving people who were not involved in political issues in the past. Well, this is happening, and this will be the most interesting thing happening, I think, in Israel within the next couple of months. The Palestinian issue is not taking a big place on the agenda. For many who are protesting the government, the Palestinian issue is very important, committed to the two-state solution, wanting to see Israeli-Palestinian peace, seeing this as a national priority, also something of importance to our neighbors, to our neighborhood. But overall, the democratic protest in Israel does not emphasize the Palestinian issue. You almost do not see also Arab participation in that protest. For many of the Arabs within Israel, democracy is not something they already feel over the last few years, so it's not entirely new for them. That's their perspective. And this is happening in a context in which escalation between Israelis and Palestinians is not new. So the escalation process is happening also at the time of the previous government. The previous government that was much more moderate, that the Prime Minister Lapid at the time committed support for the two-state solution, even if not seeing it as very feasible at the moment. But escalation already happened that period of time. And when Netanyahu comes into office, I think his priority with all the radicals around him is to try to maintain status quo on the Palestinian, on the regional front, to maintain the processes of the Negev Forum, of normalization with some of the countries, of some status quo with the Palestinians that does not erupt, to enable him to do the internal chaos that he's doing to our democracy and get a business as usual approach, almost this approach from his international allies. So the sense in Israel is that as long as nothing big erupts with the Palestinians, the international community sits a bit back, may voice concern, but not the Americans, not the Europeans, not some of the Arab countries, do not really push back as long as regional stability is maintained. And therefore, the escalation with the Palestinians will most likely come because this government has very extreme factors, but it may happen only after Netanyahu gets what he wants on the domestic legal front.
Thank you, Nimrod. So, Dalal, very strong word where we heard. So, really, the Palestinian, as Nimrod was saying, probably the Palestinian issue is not really on the agenda now. This government, this Israeli government has added in the agenda, but we have to consider what happened in 2022. That was the deadliest year for the Palestinians since 15 years, probably. It was since a very, very, very long time. And the big operation we have seen in the refugee camp in Jenin give the idea of what is going on. But as NIMROD was saying, also the previous government is almost 1 year that those operations are going on in the big cities of the West Bank. So from the Palestinian perspective, what do you fear the most? Due to what Nimrod just said, that the Palestinian issue is not really on the agenda of this government, and there is not push enough from the European Union and from the US.
Well, thank you very much, Maria. It's a great pleasure to be with you, with the other peers on the panel, and thanks for ISPI as well. Well, just to build on what you were just saying, and Nimrod as well, we have been following what was happening in Jenin, in Nablus, in Jerusalem, not only in Sheikh Jarrah, but also in Khan al-Ahmar, in Beta, in Beit Lahem, and very recently, until yesterday, in Jericho. Jericho, the most peaceful city in Palestine. 5 young men were murdered. So last year, yes, we finished 22 with around 240 martyrs, extrajudicial killings by the Israeli occupation forces. This year alone, since January 23, we have had more than 40 people murdered on the grounds of the Palestinians. So it's true, I agree with Nimrod that Palestine or peace is not on the agenda of the new Israeli government. However, on the grounds, the Israeli government is butchering the Palestinians. Every Palestinian, no matter what our ideological or geographical belongings are, every Palestinian is target to the Israeli military machine. And I have to share that when violence rewarded, we cannot expect for things but to get worse. So if we want to talk about the new Israeli government, we can only see a déjà vu scenario where we have a dilemma between democracy versus international law. Benjamin Netanyahu is returning once again as Israel Prime Minister. For the Palestinians, the question is whether the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know, really. So we have gotten to know Netanyahu very, very well. He might not be, I have to say, an actual settler, illegal personality, like some members of his cabinet are, like Itamar Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, to name a couple. But he is for sure not less extreme. I mean, his annexation policies, we know them very well. He is a divide and conquer believer. His policies of separation, land annexations, forced displacements, settlements, confiscation plans, isolating Jerusalem from the West Bank, and isolating Gaza from the West Bank as well. He is the one who had fueled Hamas with cash money in Gaza, and he had said it bluntly. He wanted to empower Hamas because he knows that is the only way he could keep the Palestinian state very fragile and shattered. So he did empower Hamas. He did work for annexation, and I cannot deny the fact that he did penetrate Arab regimes through normalization. However, to believe, and here I must bring the US into the discussion, to believe that normalization alone and to believe that pushing the economic path will bring peace to the region is totally absurd, because this is a repetitive strategy that had been tried over and over again. I mean, as long as the Arabs are engaged with Israel, they can enjoy bilateral relations, they can enjoy economic prosperity, but they cannot imagine that peace will be brought as long as the Palestinians are not part of the equation. So the pushback tactics, part of the international community are dealing with the new Israeli government, and they're waiting to see the policies of the Israeli government. While a couple of years ago, when we had the results of the Palestinian elections, this same international community rejected the democracy that brought Hamas, for example, by ballots. So why not treat those extremists at the same level? Why give them more and more time? And what is the result? We're seeing more bloodshed on the ground, more murders, more crimes. And the good news, for those who believe in the two states, for those who believe in peace, is that we have another opportunity, another very small window of opportunity, where we, Maria, instead of trying to brainstorm together and try to bring the two parties back to the negotiating table, where we need to realize that negotiations is only a tool. It's one of the tools to conflict resolution. It should not be a goal that we're all focused on. I mean, there are other tools which are very peaceful, very democratic, and very legal, if I may say. So when the Palestinians want to go to the ICJ, for example, everybody should be, or like every believer in the two-state, or anybody who is pro-peace or who's pro-dignity, pro-humanity in the 21st century, should just go ahead with the Palestinians and accept and respect any legal decision by the international court. So we have arbitration, we have litigation, we have many different mediation, many different tools which we could resort to, which are totally peaceful and legal besides negotiations. I want to add that Netanyahu himself is the master of coercive diplomacy. And this was demonstrated through the Abraham Accords, which were signed with the Emirates, Bahrain, and other Arab regimes, where they achieved, on the pretext of normalization with Israel, will halt the plans for annexation of the West Bank. But his comeback means an intensified return to this economic peace efforts, meaning that this business and military deals will be intensified rather than diplomatic negotiations to solve, or rather bypass, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. All those deals will prioritize the interests of the state elites involved, but not really their people. So normalization, economic path, the ATM approach mentality that the Biden administration is pursuing might appease the leadership, but not necessarily the people. Netanyahu had mentioned that he's shedding light and putting a lot of effort into normalizing with Saudi Arabia, and he can succeed in that, as he succeeded with the other Arab regimes. However, I have to remind him here that it was Saudi Arabia itself that came about with the Arab Peace Initiative in 2002. So yes. Why, if Israel is really keen about normalizing with the Arab world, why wouldn't they work towards normalizing with 28 Arab regimes instead of doing bilateral relations? I'll stop here and we'll continue the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dalal. So, Aaron, there is a lot of meat on the fire, as you can imagine. But of course, with you considering also the role that you have in the past, because you participated through the peace process, so you know what we are talking about, what Dalal was talking about, and so how we are far away from those years, as we were saying before. We have seen the Blinken recent visit. He met Netanyahu, he met the President Mahmoud Abbas. Still, as NIMROD was saying, do you agree what NIMROD was saying, that probably there is not a real push by the US and also by the European Union towards a real path. So they will probably link to some part of the past without considering what is going on now in the region.
Yeah, first of all, let me say it's an honor, Maria, to be here with you and DALAL and NIMROD. Look, I left government 20 some years ago. And I've been trying to persuade people ever since that if you want to have a serious discussion about how to create an environment for a negotiation leading to a conflict-ending agreement, and I choose my words very carefully here, conflict-ending agreement, you need four things. The problem is these four things, in my judgment, have really never been aligned, even when we were pursuing our efforts mediating between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And they're certainly not aligned right now. Number one, I'm a historian by training, and I don't believe history repeats, but history rhymes, and it's important to pay attention to the rhythmic patterns of the past. And those rhythmic patterns, seems to me, compel us to recognize four factors. They're simply not here right now. Number one are leaders who are masters of their politics, not prisoners of their ideologies. Every time there's been a breakthrough in this conflict, whether it's Israel-Palestine, Israel-Egypt, Israel-Jordan, and even a decade of Israeli-Syrian negotiations, you had leaders who were willing to consider making the kinds of decisions that are necessary. You do not have those leaders right now. Number two, you need a sense of ownership, certainly in the part of Israelis and Palestinians. And I'm not suggesting it's not there, but Israelis and Palestinians need to care more about their own negotiations than any external party. It's no coincidence that every breakthrough, such as they are, in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict occurred without the participation of the United States. I remember I was at the State Department in October of 1977 when Moshe Dayan showed up briefing the Carter administration that Sadat's vice president, Hami, had been meeting secretly with him. Israel-Jordan, DALAL knows this very well. The Israeli-Jordanian contacts stretch back decades. We didn't help draft the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty. We provided any number of other, what I would call off-the-table benefits. And Israel-Palestine, I was on vacation on the west coast of Florida when I got a call from the State Department Operations Center telling me to come home immediately because Secretary Christopher was on his way to California to see Foreign Minister Holst and Shimon Peres. We knew that there was something called Oslo. We did not understand that it was a decision-making channel. All of these efforts, every single one, occurred without the active participation of the United States, and that's why the ones that actually succeeded did succeed because there was a sense of ownership. Three, you do need external mediation. But you need a mediator willing to apply both honey and vinegar at the same time. Honey is very important to provide incentives to both Israelis and Palestinians, but vinegar is also required because there's no way you're going to be able to bridge the gaps that exist on security, borders, refugees, Jerusalem, the end of conflict and all of claims without disincentives. These are hard decisions. And the administrations that actually succeeded in Arab-Israeli peacemaking, Nixon and Kissinger, 3 disengagement agreements after the 73 war, Jimmy Carter, the Camp David Summit, and the Egyptian-Israeli Peace Treaty, and the administration, one of them that I worked for, Bush 41 and James Baker, Madrid, for the success that it was. And I'm not trying to argue that that it was conflict ending. These presidents wrestled with Israeli leaders and their supporters in the United States. And yet they succeeded in achieving something. And finally, you need an agreement that meets the basic core needs and requirements of both Israelis and Palestinians on the core issues. And there are at least 5 border security, refugees, Jerusalem, and an agreement to give up all irredenta, all juridical claims, and stand before their respective parliaments and say, we may not love one another. We have a history of trauma and wounding. It will take time. DALAL participated in a program that I was involved with, Seeds of Peace, where you actually had an opportunity for Israelis and Palestinians, Jordanians, Egyptians, then Tunisians, Moroccans, and Yemenis, Afghans, Indians, and Pakistanis at 14, 15, and 16 to actually engage with one another. An agreement on those 5 issues, in my judgment, is simply not possible because the other 3 elements, leadership, ownership, and effective, I would say U.S. mediation, DALAL has justified concerns with how various administrations have reacted to the Israeli-Palestinian issue. We made many mistakes, many mistakes. And perhaps the most fatal one was going to the Camp David summit in July of 2000, where DALAL's father was actively involved, pleading, because I think we understood that if that summit ended in recrimination and the blame game, we were setting ourselves up for what ultimately followed, from which I might add, the Israeli-Palestinian relationship has not yet recovered. Hopefully it will recover, but it has not yet recovered. So you have the Biden administration. They're all people I know well. Bill Burns, director of CIA, Jake Sullivan, Tony Blinken. They care about this, but governing is about choosing. And it's hard for me to believe that the administration is going to invest the necessary domestic and foreign policy equities not to go to a negotiation. DALAL is absolutely right. We do not need another negotiation that's going to fail, but to create the kind of environment that might, just might over time, produce such a negotiation. I do not believe the Biden administration is prepared, willing and able to do that, because that would involve a lot of vinegar, particularly with one party.
Yeah.
And I just don't see it. I mean, the president is going to declare his candidacy probably in the next several weeks or months. You have a Republican Party that has set itself up as the Israel right or wrong party, and a divided Democratic Party. And the political costs of trying and failing for an administration that has Russia, and Ukraine, and China, I would argue a cold clinical assessment. I'm not talking about the morality and ethics of the situation. They're not going to make that judgment. The question is, if you face an explosion that goes beyond anything we've seen before,
Exactly.
qualitatively and quantitatively, the administration simply may have no choice but to engage. But I don't know what the outcome would be. Sorry to drone on here, but this is extremely important.
No, it's very clear. No, in fact, and I would like to go back to NIMROD to talk about also the internal situation, because what we are watching in Israel during these recent weeks, it's really something unique, and it gives also how much Israel, the Israelis, a part of the Israeli population, is really a vibrant democracy. They are not afraid to go in the street and say, no, we do not accept this. This is anti-democracy. So how much what we have seen is going to affect, because of course now Netanyahu is worried also for the economical effect of these big protests going on in Tel Aviv, and not only in Tel Aviv, all the big cities are involved. Of course, Tel Aviv is the big one. So how much also this helps somehow it's weakening this government that is, as you remember, is not a right government, is a far right government, as we have never seen in Israel. NIMROD.
The government has quite a significant majority in parliament, more than we're used to see in previous cases. which is more than the popular vote that it got, but it enables a lot of power to pass legislation. So in terms of pure politics, it can pass by the Knesset whatever legislation it was. It's not as if there are members of Knesset within the coalition that may turn against Netanyahu-led initiative. The challenge is to create enough public pressure from within to somehow change the calculus of things. And of course, the change, if it comes, will come from internal pressure. It's not something that will be based on external actors coming to save Israel. That will not be the case, but definitely support and backing for those in Israel that are working for peace and democracy from the international community will be helpful. There's quite a lot the international community can do to support our efforts back home. Then when this is happening, and again, Netanyahu's interest, as I read it, is to put the Palestinian issue on a lower space, not in his agenda, but in the international agenda, meaning to contain it, meaning to not allow Ben-Gvir Smotrich to do provocations that go beyond a certain limit, as long as he's doing his internal battle. But it's not as if the Israeli decisions within the government decide or dictate what will happen on the streets of Jenin and Jericho. We see things happening on a different trajectory. We saw the terror attack in Jerusalem as well. So things are happening on the ground and have a life of their own. And then those international actors and local actors who want to advance peace between Israelis and Palestinians should look into which steps could be taken now. And it's not about final status negotiations. We are totally not there. I fully agree with Aaron on that. But is it about putting some red lines to both sides, what the international community expects Israelis and Palestinians to do and not to do? Is it about engaging in preventive diplomacy? US and Jordan together. We saw King Abdullah in the White House last week. We saw the Jordanians last year before Ramadan work very successfully to prevent a significant escalation during the holy month. This should happen again this year in April.
Yes.
Overlap between Ramadan, Passover, very sensitive. So preventive diplomacy. It's about creating new international groupings that deal with the Israeli-Palestinian issue. The Middle East Quartet, not functioning anymore, not even convening since the war in Ukraine. Other countries could pitch in. Jordan, Egypt, some EU member states, France, Germany, maybe others. So we need new international mechanisms of like-minded countries that really want to invest some political capital, even if not too much, on that. We can look into how to tie the Palestinian issue into the Negev Forum Abraham Accords without expecting other Jordan or the Palestinians to be part of that, but to make sure their interests are represented in the next summit and they can benefit from any projects that are coming out of it. And we can take into account what happened in the sidelines of the UN General Assembly last September when the Saudis convened a multilateral gathering to discuss the future of the Arab Peace Initiative and the need to update it. So not much has come out of that specific meeting, but in terms of putting a future-oriented incentive, the Arab Peace Initiative in an updated form could still be relevant. And all of that, finalizing, in what Aaron talked about, seeds of peace, people to people, engagement between the societies. Israelis and Palestinians almost never meet anymore in dialogue and joint endeavors.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of new American money through the MEPA fund coming in. That's something that should be happening much more. We need more Israelis, more Palestinians to engage constructively, positively with each other in order to spark the change that we want to see in the long term.
Dalala, you have heard what Aaron said. I mean, he's very pessimistic about any possibility of reviving sort of this process because he's a leaders, as masters and non-prisoners. How do you judge the situation in the Palestinian leadership towards that? I mean, do you think that the Palestinian leadership now is a prisoner somehow?
It's important to learn from our mistakes and to learn from the past experiences. And, having Aaron with us is a big lesson to all of us. And I do agree with many of the things that he said. However, I mean, the step-by-step approach, Aaron, of dealing with tiny bits and pieces here and there, some closures here, some ID matters here, some security arrangements here, I think this was proven wrong. And, the people-to-people engagements are something that I have been there. I appreciate it. I respect it. But I am perfectly suited now to tell you that it's not enough. It's a waste of energy. It's a waste of time. So we all know that the Palestinians live under an Israeli prolonged occupation. if we are all dedicated and devoted to bringing peace to this region, we should start by ending the Israeli occupation. I would argue for shifting from a micro approach to a more macro approach, where we deal with the occupation, we end the occupation, we define the borders of the state of Israel, and then we start talking about the details that really matter. So the Biden administration is still talking about a political settlement. And you mentioned that the biggest mistake was Camp David, Aaron. I'm sorry, but you missed Trump, the Trump's administration. You know, the damage that the Trump brought to our grounds, the imposed facts that he brought to our grounds. He even put the two of the most important final status issues, Jerusalem and the refugees, off the table. You know, but when Trump labeled Jerusalem and identified it by religious matters and labeled it as a capital for the Jewish people, he totally destroyed the dynamics or the equation of any peace process. And here we have to argue the role of the US again. You know, the fact that Trump had the audacity and had the courage and had the authorities to do what he did makes me believe that Biden has all the authorities as president, who had, of course, reversed all of Trump's decisions from Mexico to climate change, to other transgender policies, no matter what. Why didn't you do the same with the Palestinians? You know, Biden and Blinken, they promised since May 21 that they would reopen the consulate in Jerusalem, for example. What did they do? Nothing. And this comes as a reflection of treating Palestinians as minorities and not as people who have the right to self-determination. And so here I want to argue on a macro approach where we have to start by ending the Israeli occupation. If we are pro-peace, if we are pro-two-state solution, it doesn't really need a genius. We know what it takes. We don't need to reinvent wheels. I very much love humanity, and I love and respect prosperity, economy, you know, investments, people-to-people engagements. However, it has all been tried. So why do you want to waste more energy and time and money? And I want to also mention, you know, Jerusalem, what we're seeing in Sheikh Jarrah, in Khan al-Ahmar, in Jaffa Gate, it's all inspired by what Trump did in Jerusalem. So when the Americans come today and tell me that they don't really bear a big responsibility, allow me to share with you that the Palestinian public, after 3 decades of negotiations, you mentioned my own father was, he was blamed for choosing that path of diplomacy, dialogue, because he could not deliver to his own people. He could not deliver statehood, no sovereignty, no borders, no dignity for his own people. And unfortunately, sad enough, as a daughter, he had to live this life without realizing his dreams. So the Palestinian public is very, very dismayed, not only by the leadership, but not only by the Israeli occupation, but also by the international community, and including the US administration. The previous US administration imposed damage on our grounds, and we come again and we talk about a deja vu Marshall Plan. The international community and the US bear significant responsibility for what is happening. They are tolerating now the extremist new Israeli government. It is also impossible to ignore the 3.8 billion in military aid that the US government gives on annual basis to the Israeli military machine that commits crimes against the Palestinian people. And at the UN, successive states and successive US administrations have given Israel cover to violate human rights. And what? They're still enjoying impunity. Most recently, they're vetoing many or abstaining from many UN Security Council resolutions or General Assembly resolutions that only call for the protection of the Palestinian people. So I'm sorry, but we need to realize that many states, many regimes are implicated directly or indirectly in Israel's alleged war crimes against the Palestinian people. The international community needs to realize that it's not a matter of periodic flare-ups or ceasefires. This is about the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. We are looked at as minorities. There is no respect to the right of the Palestinian people to their right of self-determination. It's been 75 years of injustices. So if we want to talk about, boycotting the extremists in this government, this would be a start. This would talking about sanctions against, and you mentioned Ukraine and Russia. We had seen just recently how the international community reacted, what actions they could take. Why not when it comes to Israel? The discourse
very clear.
The discourse on human rights, on justice, on prosperity is very, very much appreciated. But I think all of us, all those who care about bringing peace to this region, must start and must shift the focus into dealing with the root causes of the problem, which is ending the Israeli occupation.
Thank you so much. So, Aaron, it's very clear that we cannot. I mean, the US must be inside. I totally agree about what you said, because we need leaders that must be really engaged. But it's clear, as you said, that we need an external mediation. And it's like they're not the condition of what we have seen in the previous peace process, as you remembered, the one with Egypt, the one with Jordan, etc. So how do you reply to Dalal?
I mean, look, Saab would be very proud. Dalal is passionate, eloquent, and she speaks truth to many different power centers. I'm simply reporting to you. First of all, Dalal, I was not a part of the Trump administration. I was asked by Mr. Kushner.
No, I know.
To come and brief him, and I did do that, and he did not listen to what I had to say. He was far more interested, and they made good on their promise in what I call the 22-state solution, rather than the two-state solution. He made it unmistakably clear that his father-in-law wanted to establish a strategic relationship with Saudi Arabia and make it impossible for an Israeli prime minister to say no to his father-in-law. So, and you're right about the damage that has been done. I'm reporting to you from Washington, and Miriam, let me just emphasize one point. I'm not a pessimist. I worked for 25 years under a set of illusions, and I can no longer abide by those illusions, because I think it's the costs of having those illusions are too high for Israelis and Palestinians to bear. But at the same time, I also understand that an American president will engage in this issue under only one of two circumstances. And right now, neither prevails. One set of circumstances is a crisis that even the Biden administration will not be able to escape, because it does not want to be the administration that presides over the final end to what I consider to be the only viable and realistic, with all of the downsides that it conveys, of separation through negotiation into two states with a resolution of the 5 core issues. That offers the least bad approach to how to deal with the problems that Israelis and Palestinians, and it's unique. It's not Israel-Egypt, it's not Israel-Jordan, and it's not Israel and what I call the out of conflict zone agreements that the previous government managed to make with the Emiratis, the Bahrainis, the Moroccans, and tentative efforts with Sudan. So in the face of crisis, a crisis so hot and irrepressible that no administration can ignore it, or alternatively, in response to opportunity. If there's no pain and there's no prospects of gain, what you're going to have is an administration that will, for any number of reasons it believes to be legitimate, will continue to dance around and avoid engagement, serious engagement in this issue, for 100 reasons that NIMROD and DALAL know as well as I do. So, I mean, I could offer up a pathway, but the administration is not going to take it. And I don't know how else to, I describe myself, forgive me, Dalal, but I think Saab also was this way, as an idealist without illusion. That's how President Kennedy saw himself, as an idealist without illusion, never giving up on the hope, the opportunity, the chance that Israeli-Palestinian peace can be had, but go through the process with your eyes wide open. When we briefed President Clinton at Camp David, he went around the room and asked everybody whether, these were after the invitations were issued, not before, unfortunately. And Saab and Arafat warned us about the costs of failure if we went up to the mountain and didn't succeed, we would enter the valley. No one really understood how dark the valley would be by the fall of 2000. But when we briefed President Clinton, he went around the room and asked if he should go, and everybody said the same thing. And then he came to me and said, "What do you think?" And instead of telling the president what I should have told him, was I basically said what everybody else said. The Israelis were not ready, the Palestinians were not ready, and Bill Clinton was not ready. And the costs of what happened, Barack kept pushing for a summit. Only at a summit, he argued, in the crucible of negotiation, in the heat of a negotiation, would Israelis and Palestinians be able to address these issues. It was fantastical thinking in the summer of 2000, given the Oslo experience and the incremental approach that Oslo involved. So I wish I could convey a pathway forward. DALAL has proposed all sorts of ideas, and she's right. Negotiations, I think, is the most important, but it's not the only way. I just think the receptivity of this administration to most of these ideas, it's just not there. Pain and gain is what will be required. And all the breakthroughs, frankly, involved both.
Thank you so much, Aaron, because we really have... we really have 2 minutes left, and so I will give the floor first to NIMROD and then to DALAL, just sending this message that we received from the public. Is there a possibility of a major escalation in the near term, concrete at the moment? I mean, do we fear this? So first to NIMROD and then to DALAL.
Yes, there is a danger of escalation. Just looking at the people in power in Israel, their declared policies, their declared intentions, how this runs contrast to the wish of many Israelis and of most Palestinians, the chances are there. But it doesn't mean that will necessarily happen. I think much of it depends how the situation will be managed. So if those in Israel, those in Palestine, those in the international community who care about the issue, want to see peace, want to avoid escalation, actually take actions and be willing to sit together and reflect on what's needed, then I think that could be avoided. Not an easy path, but it's possible, and it's much also up to us.
DALAL, to you, last words. We cannot hear you. Yes.
Well, to continue to deal with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict from a very much liberal peace-building approach has been tried. It has been proven wrong. I think given the pain that we witnessed for 15 years in Gaza under siege, Aaron, the pain that we are witnessing on Palestinian streets, not only in the refugee camps, but all kinds of cities, we are witnessing people being murdered. My own cousin has been held hostage for 2 years and a half. He was murdered on his sister's wedding day. So, I mean, the injustices that the Palestinian people are facing on daily basis, let alone the confiscation of lands, and the settler terror today that we are witnessing is very, very alarming. Those who care for peace, those who care for humanity in the 21st century should only work towards ending the Israeli occupation. Thank you.
So thank you for all of you. Unfortunately, we don't have, for the time being, a positive message, but let's hope really that there is a breakthrough somehow. Thank you, NIMROD GOREN. Thank you, DALAL IRIQAT. Thank you, Aaron David Miller. And thank you, ISPI, for giving
Maria, the fact that we are all here together is a very positive hope, because we're still dedicated to bringing change into our worlds, into our region.
And we have to go on. We have to go on discussing. I think this is the strength, and this is important that we have to keep it high, the attention. So, Aaron, especially from the American side, and it was very interesting what you said about what you should have said at the Camp David meeting to President Clinton. Yes. So thank you to all of you for being with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.